Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to our PhD students as well, in particular. Thanks so much for coming to this event. Over the next couple days, we're going to have some really fascinating talks on contentious data and algorithms and digital activism. And this morning, it gives me great pleasure to kick off with Emiliano Trere. Emiliano is a reader in data agency and media ecologies at Cardiff University in their School of Journalism, Media and Culture. Before that, he was an associate professor at the Autonomous University of Querétaro in Mexico. He's a very widely cited author in digital activism, critical data, algorithm studies, and he has a particular focus on the Global South and Latin America. He actually co-founded the Big Data from the South initiative. He co-directs the Data Justice Lab. And he has several books out, but I'm going to plug the one that's forthcoming with MIT Press called Algorithms of Resistance, which was written with Tiziano Bonini. And this book explores collective forms of power, agency, and resistance in the platform society. And I believe he's going to be giving us a fascinating preview of the research that is going to be published in this book with MIT Press. So without further ado, and thank you and welcome to all the people online as well. Thanks so much for joining us. I present Emiliano Trere. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, an honor, and thanks a lot, especially to Cristina for organizing, for inviting me with this new lab here in Aarhus. It's great to be here. It's great to be here with you for these 2 days. I'm gonna talk a bit about what Cristina was saying about this forthcoming book with Tiziano, my dear friend who's in Italy. Just had a baby, so he's having his hands full now. But I'm gonna talk also on behalf of you, my friend. And during these 2 days, we're going to talk a lot about what Cristina was saying, contentious data. This is part of, this talk is based on an article, part of this fantastic special issue that Cristina and Stefania are editing. And it's just a small piece of that, but, you know, hopefully something that is going to give you a lot of food for thought. And it's called Beyond Hashtag Activism, Algorithmic Repertoires and the Struggle for Visibility in the Platform Society. You begin this saying that I didn't look for algorithms. Algorithms found me in a way. It's just so we have this encounter with them, and they found me in Mexico. So while I was doing research there, it was 2011, 2012 at the beginning, was a lot of political turmoil. Well, I must say in Mexico, there's always political turmoil. So but that particular time, there was a lot of this. We had a lot of, was the first time that I encountered these Twitter bots, kind of automated accounts, agents online. So I started to talk about algorithms and what they do in the realm of politics, which then fed my book, Hybrid Media Activism, my first monograph. And then I wrote this chapter called From Digital Activism to Algorithmic Resistance, to kind of signal a transition from what, not really a transition, because, you know, from a media ecologist standpoint, you never completely transition to something else, but it's a kind of a diversification and accumulation of, and an integration, I would say, of algorithms into the realm also of collective action, but at the same time of all the repression strategies that the government and other kind of political parties were putting in place. And the Mexican institutional politics was experimenting with that well before what we know, the Trump election. That it seems that if something happens in the West, then everything is all of a sudden is like, wow, this is happening for real. But that's been going on for at least since 2009 and 2008 in other countries. At least in Mexico was always a political laboratory, and so that happened. The use of bots, the use of automated accounts to tweet misinformation and propaganda, that was well before the Trump age in 2016. And we have other example of that as well. So they encountered me there, so I was trying to see what is going on here, what is the dynamic in place, how algorithmic politics is changing politics, and some of the strategies that we have seen. And I reflected on that in this chapter and in part of my book, whose third blocks is dedicated to algorithms and what I call the mutual shaping between social movements and algorithms. So, and that's the first encounter, let's say. But then I met with Tiziano. It was a beautiful day in Siena, pre-pandemic days, 2019. We didn't know what was going to happen, and nobody knew. And we came together. I gave a keynote at in Siena at the university, and at the same time it was an occasion to meet because Tiziano have been working a lot on the cultural implication of algorithms, especially on platforms like recommendation algorithms on Spotify and that kind of that was going on with the streaming platforms. And I had written on politics and algorithms, looking at collective action and how it's changed in highly datafied environments. So which sort of joined forces, and we thought to launch a project and to hopefully write a book that kind of condensed the whole thing. So it had the part on activism, on politics, and the changes, and it had the cultural part. So we wanted to have not just big influencers, and not just like the Kardashians. We wanted to have the meso influencer. We wanted to have the people that try to make a living out of that, and they have to deal algorithms in their own practices. So these affects all of us, because the main thing that we were seeing is that this is something that goes beyond politics. This is something that goes beyond culture. This is something that affects everything. So the other realm that we included is work. So the project was conceived as something that explored delivery workers and couriers that are the most affected by the whims and the changes and the dynamics of algorithms on their work, on their daily job activities, on the way they make money, make a living, et cetera, et cetera. So there's work, there's culture in a way, so the cultural sphere, and there is politics that are all connected in a way, but we wanted to bring to the fore the fact that this is something that algorithms affect our lives, daily, and all these realms of social life. And that was the start of this. And so the focus is shift toward the tactics that people develop to deal with and live within algorithmic forms of power, institution, and authority, illuminating and examining and exposing the practices that they enact to cope with algorithmic infrastructures, and propose a conceptual framework with which we want to make sense of all of them, and realigning the attention towards the forms of agency that arise in different contexts of datafication, penetrating different systems of governance and political environments. This also originates a bit from a frustration. The frustration is just also many of the frameworks that we were seeing, and we still see, that they left agency unattended, or they sort of picture a world where automation is inevitable. We are just puppets in the end of big tech or whatever, which, it has a big part of truth in it, even, the surveillance capitalism thesis with which we engage. But at the same time, for us, it really forecloses the possibility that we have as social agents. And it was really a reductive kind of conception of, and also a reductive conception of power. So we take a really a Foucauldian stance, where there's power, there's resistance. These are part of the same dance, not one without the other. And so we try to give, to shift the focus to what people and in different kind of realms can do with algorithms. And the project has generated, it's been a big 3 years project, so it has generated quite a lot of outcomes. And one of these, the biggest one, is the Algorithm of Resistance book, which is forthcoming. I'm dealing with the proofs now. Oh, what a nightmare. All those details, that's the hardest part, but almost there. And then we have different articles also in Italians and in English out, covering different aspects. I'm not going to enter into detail because I want to go straight to the politics part, but it's been across a multi-country project in India, China, Spain, Italy, and Mexico. So we have a lot of different comparison and data about all these three groups, social movements, gig workers, and influencers. So it's been great to look at this from this perspective, both diachronically and comparatively. And yeah, I mean, part of it is already out, of course, like with different kind of publication, but the book is going to be the most substantial piece of reflection on it. Instead, that we wrote mainly a theoretical one, thought as a theoretical contribution, and we wrote in these beautiful special issues. As I said, amplification, evasion, and hijacking, and this is the part I'm going to focus about right now because it's, it's the most, I think, interesting for the debate we're going to have during these days about contentious data politics and algorithmic systems. Sums up the reflection developed in the article as a kind of way of, sometimes you write article because you want to clarify yourself what you're seeing around, the phenomena that you're seeing, and you want to try to do it also for students. You think maybe scholars alike, this is going to be something that I write that hopefully will shed light on this, and people were gonna, this way of systematizing things will be helpful for people, because when we see a lot of different concepts thrown on the table or whatever, there's a bit of confusion. So we thought, let's try to make a bit of clarification about what we're seeing. And we start from the data politics realm, where Beraldo in Milan and Stefania is on her way here, has been highly influential on how we think data, of course. And these two big set, the contentious politics of data on one side and what they call the institutional politics of data. And so we try to locate algorithmic politics within data politics, so as a subset of it, and then to try to dissect it in a way. So on one side, there is institutional and strategic politics of algorithms, and on the other side, there's a contentious, a tactical politics of algorithms, which we identify with algorithmic activism. We know the institutional politics of algorithms. It's been also called Mali, I call it algorithmic populism. He's got a new book forthcoming with Routledge. It's going to be a really good one on that. And then others have called it computational propaganda. The Oxford team with a big project, they, analyzed so many countries and they focused on these kind of top-down processes and dynamics. And so this is computational propaganda, because they put the focus on how propaganda evolves in the digital age and with algorithms. Then the contentious politics of algorithm, we identify with algorithmic activism because we think that it brings more clarity to the field. And of course, within algorithmic activism, we can, and this is based also on a distinction of Beraldo and Emiliano, we can look at it either as stakes or of repertoire. With stakes, we look at algorithmic as a fight against algorithmic systems, for example, organizations that try to bring transparency to biases or to inequality related to algorithms that permeate our daily lives. You know, you're fighting, you know, it's a kind of you're fighting against something. You're fighting this kind of system as they materialize in the world. Whereas when we conceive them as repertoire, and this is what we try to do here, you know, to do a typology of algorithms used as repertoire, we focus on how they are added, integrated into social movements repertoire of protest and action, just like, you know, together with the other kind of forms of protest and mobilization, etc., how they are integrated in order, you know, as a repertoire, you know. So I would think this is more like algorithms, how social movement operates through that, or more than operate against data. So it's a more, it's a different thing. Of course, these things overlap in real life many times. So there's this switch. And the article tried to bring this clarity to the debate, and at the same time highlight three important dynamics. So a typology, not of course comprehensive. There could be more, but we think that this typology is quite interesting because it gives us an idea of how algorithms can be used by social movements as a repertoire. And we highlight algorithmic amplification, algorithmic evasion, and hijacking, which I'm going to talk in a second. Or part of the, you know, the reflection on algorithmic activism derives from this frustration, I will say, with this infrastructural turn and the limitation that we see, that me and Tiziano saw especially in the discourse around platform power, this kind of monolithic accounts of power. There is nothing, you know, we can do. We are all automated, leaving agency and resistance unattended most of the times, you know. We look at algorithmic agency as a kind of user reflexive ability to make the algorithms work to their own needs. I'm not going to enter into the wide debate on algorithmic agency, which will deserve, you know, a kind of talk of its own. But we really stress this reflexive ability in our work. And as I was saying, algorithmic politics is a subset of data politics that is concerned with how different kind of groups exercise their algorithmic agency by appropriating and acting upon algorithm in order to fulfill their political objectives. So you see here the continuity, but at the same time the disruption. You know, it's a dynamic of both in a way, which, you know, often is the case with social movements. Activism, I love this kind of this picture that brings, you know, kind of the algorithm to the streets. We identified with the contentious politics of data that is concerned with how a range of actors, including activists and social movements and civil society actors, the red, I'm going to read the red, not a good color choice, love red, but engage with and act upon algorithms to achieve their political aims and pursue social change. So this phenomenon, as I was saying, is a form of contention algorithmic politics, which is exercised through a tactical form of algorithmic agency. And of course, I've been repeating this repertoire a lot, okay? So I've been talking about the concept of repertoire of contentions quite a lot. Of course, I mean, I don't have, if you are familiar with social movement studies, I don't have to insist too much on that because, of course, I mean, it's well known from Tilly onwards. Is a concept that has been used a lot. I've put you in because it's they're doing a conference in the University of Copenhagen at the same time on technology movements. So is somebody who has used the concept in the to describe what is going on with digital technology. And I was reading this new very interesting paper by Christina Fleischer-Fominaya on democracy, trying to bring, you know, democratic innovation repertoire. So it's interesting link. So it's always a fruitful, helpful concept to think a lot of phenomena that we see in the world. And we think it's really strong also to think about how algorithms are thought, imagined, and integrated within the repertoire of movements. Another idea that influence our work is, of course, the distinction that I was just making, that Meraldo Emiliano does between stakes and repertoire. And I think it's a really interesting distinction to think this through, to think of data activism more in general. But there is, of course, another element, and that's the element of visibility. So the struggle is to make yourself visible. And while I was, you know, going up the stairs, I saw that there were books here published probably by people from ours on metrics, you know, and really interesting. And the thing is that visibility nowadays in this kind of environment is structured through metrics, is structured to logics that pertain to metrics, and they are black boxed in a way, you know, so you have to try and fail to see how exactly you're going to be given this visibility. And the platforms decide that in ways that are often, I would say, almost obscure to us and to civil society actors. So you got to play with that visibility. You got to try to obtain it, but it's always a negotiation, you know. So how do you do it? How do you try to achieve it? How you try to deny it to other, for example, repressive forces that you don't want to have visibility? But it's also about concomitantly narrative agency, as Young would have it, or narrative capacity, which is basically the same thing, the capacity to narrate themselves of social movements that has to deal with these algorithmically infused environments. Now, mostly for their digital practices, they need to come through that and they need to engage with that. This is why I was talking about the mutual shaping between social movements and algorithms. That's always this mutual dynamic going on in a way or the other. That's not the only one going on, but it's an important one which we cannot ignore. All right, so these are some of the pillars, conceptual pillars for this reflection on this paper. And here we come to this taxonomy, to this typology, right, of this practices, the main dynamics: amplification, evasion, and hijacking. Those who know me know that I'm obsessed with three in a way. So in a way, ecologies, imaginaries, algorithms, amplification, evasion, hijacking. Well, we can talk about that. Two is not enough. 4 is too much. 3 is always, you know, the Romans, they will know. So if you have studied rhetoric, you know what I'm talking about. But that's for another talk. We talk about the power of 3. The first one is amplification, and possibly the most important one. You know, you want to amplify the message. In specific political junctures, the activists, they integrate the algorithms to multiply, to amplify their voice in order to acquire more visibility while strengthening their agency and the narrative capacity. So I put 3 books that talk about this in a way. in different contexts. So my book talks about how they do that in Italy, different movements, in Mexico and in Spain. They're trying to see how they go about that in these three different contexts. But the thing is that they do it in all these three contexts. Hashtag Activism is a book that looks specifically at Twitter and the creation of counterpublics through digital technologies, looking at how this is done, especially in the US. Really interesting book to see, race and gender related movements, Black Lives Matter, how they use algorithms to amplify their message. They leverage communities to spread narratives related to race, racial justice, and so on and so forth. And this other book that I put is by Ramon Feenstra and others. It's a small book with Routledge. There's a part on how the Indignados were doing that. They were specialists. They were at the forefront of this kind of algorithmic amplification of their narrative, of their message. During a lot of time, they were at the forefront of this, and there were a lot of similarities to what I was looking at in terms of practices of amplification of their message. And in terms of trying to amplify also the through the hashtag, and this is why they call it hashtag activism. We will see the limitation of this, but also the power of this, because Twitter is particularly lends itself particularly well for this kind of amplification in a way, whereas other platforms less. And this is because also of the hashtag and this particular narrative capacity of hashtag themselves. And of course, it's all about like amplifying the visibility, having a presence, trying to amplify the message, strengthen your narrative capacity. But in other cases, activists can also rely on algorithm to amplify the visibility of someone, to expose them, to hurt them. Just like, I'm going to amplify that because I want people to know you are. But in this case, in the case of Trump and Reddit and all this through the Google algorithm, it was to make Trump look bad. Exactly, to kind of associate him through words as a particular set of words. I think was a stupid and just like idiot, the American Idiot, the Green Day song, and try to amplify a negative message, because a negative message amplified is seen by many people, and that's negative visibility, but that's also we think it's a form of amplification. It's just amplifying and visibilizing something to hurt a public persona. That's been done on the right, on the left, many times. That's been a lot of trying amplification in terms of racial slurs, and think about Michelle Obama, for example, trying to associate particular images when you look up for her in on Google or on other kind of search engines, and that's been going on for a while. So the negativity and the amplification of it works on the two sides of the barricades. Okay, so amplification, trying to get your message there, either your message that you want to communicate and to be as close as what you want to really communicate, or either amplifying something bad, wanting to hurt somebody through amplifying his or her visibility. Evasion, which is also really tricky and interesting kind of practice, that's about fighting against the codes of the digital platforms and the regulation to try to have your voice heard, because platforms are big actors in this fight. They are, of course, one of the most important ones. Think about vaccine opposed groups. We have had many, with COVID trying to bypass community guidelines and moderation features on social media using what is called lexical variation, So you will have, if you see here, vaccine with that at to prevent algorithmic detection and blocking of content. This is, of course, something that is going on recursively, because the moment the machine knows what you're doing, it's try to put other kind of that. So you have to kind of evade it. So evasion is a continuous back and forth struggle to try to be on top of that. There's, again, another mutual shaping. There's the machine, the people behind it programming it, and then there are people trying to evade it. So it's a back and forth continuous interaction. Think about the creation of vaccine-neutral hashtag to spread misinformation. But also, as others have demonstrated, the practice of anti-vax strategies are always adapted to specific digital platform. And here I want you to think about the fact that this is always platform specific, and in a way, the affordances of the platforms matter a lot. Now, so this mutual shaping is always something that is done mutually with another platform with their own codes, regulation, possibilities that, of course, are negotiated. But always the encounters that I was talking about is always. I like to see affordances as encounters, between actors and the infrastructures. But there's one thing you can do, one thing you can imagine to do something different. And in these kind of encounters, these strategies are molded. On Facebook, for example, they provide links to vaccination misinformation in the comments section rather than in a regional post, because it's said to be to be easier to spread. On Instagram, they will develop ephemeral content strategies, including anti-vaccination content in the stories, rather than in feed or rely on codes language using words like toxins and metals instead of vaccines. That speaks to these codes that you use. I think for linguists, this is also highly interesting, how these codes and these kind of jargon, these vernacular practices are spreading online, and how they feed into this digital culture for a lot of activists and so on and so forth. And also, algorithmic evasion has been really important for what is called content moderation circumvention. That, for example, has been really, really, really key for in these kind of pro-anorexia movement, pro-anorexia activism, we'll say. For example, as you can see here, the ban of phrases from Instagram, such as anorexia, pro-ana, which means pro-anorexia, or thin-spiration, thigh gap, and the blocking of certain action began as soon as 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. But this has led to an incredible multiplication of lexical variants of the banned text to deceive this algorithmic control. For example, using this other variation of lexical variation to deceive the algorithm. But also, it's interesting to see that these scholars many scholars have shown that Instagram ban worsened the situation. So new variants have had more reach, actually, than those that they were designed to replace, spreading to other platforms, especially Tumblr and Twitter. So sometimes the moderation from the platform, and this shows the agency of users circumventing, being able to work around it in many ways. And this back and forth again, I circumvent this, you add this, I try other ways, I try other platforms, I spread this, I use it this and that. And this is a continuous kind of development of algorithmic sophistication by activists. Right, activists doing what has been described in the literature as dog whistling. That is also has to do with codes. For example, Bath and Klein has called dog whistling the practice of using symbols and terminology that means something to the larger audience, but of course acquire a different meaning for a specific group. In the case that they look at for suprematist audiences, you know, and this derogatory terminology for African Americans, for Muslims, and together with symbols such as parentheses, percentages used to spread hate and racist, xenophobic content that somehow flew under the algorithmic detection radar of Twitter. In the book with Tiziano, we scrutinize it in the far right, especially in the Italian far right, where the use of these codes on Twitter have been really used to offend and with derogatory slurs, anti-fascist politicians. And the reliance on a particular language for avoiding algorithmic control and surveillance under authoritarian government has also been observed in other contexts, such as Turkey. There is this great study by Tonneson showing how activists who oppose the government appropriate what she calls the vernacular Twitter language and the Western popular culture, including drawing subtle comparison between movie villains and the presidents, reference to early internet phenomena, and captioning viral videos with implied political messages, something that is relatively easy to escape the more kind of the more traditional forms of surveillance that they have in place in the Turkish Twitter sphere, for example. So it works, as you can see, it works both ways, you know, both for spreading far-right supremacist, misogynist messages, but at the same time in ways to trying to make parody or satire or this kind of, or memes or other things that fly under the radar of this detection control of various platforms. So again, adding gay, but at the same time to try to bring a bit of critique through irony. And the last one is algorithmic hijacking. I found this image to kind of the Smurfs, the Blue Lives Matter, no? To try to bring a bit of this, which you can find, you know, they were flooding the hashtag, especially K-pop fans, which I'll talk about in a second. So what is hijacking? What is algorithmic hijacking? Is a practice, it's been described by computer scientists as a practice where hashtags are used to spread unrelated content and spam or negative sentiments, you know. The aim is to tarnish the intended motive of a hashtag, you know, so its presence is rendered counterproductive, you know. So it's not something that amplifies anymore, you know. It's not something that is there to contribute to public debate that can be joined or counter-published, as the other scholars would have it. And in fact, they analyze it as, and they call it collective hijacking. You know, in the case of Jackson and Foucault-Wells, they wrote a paper before the book on the Twitter hashtag of the My New York Police Department, which was collectively hijacked following the launch of a public relation campaign by the New York City Police Department in 2014. So it was already, you know, almost 10 years ago. And they describe the collective appropriation of this to spread an alternative message, a critique, etc., etc. What are the main masters of this kind of collective hijacking power? Well, it's K-pop fandoms, sophisticated young Korean, but also international fan-based that dedicated to their idols of South Korean music, that is now one of the biggest global cultural phenomenon in the world, basically now, that have used their skills, highly sophisticated tech-savvy skills, in the art of algorithmic manipulation and the hijacking at the service of social justice causes. The relation to activism is should be explored more, because they activate themselves when social justice causes arise that they want to contribute to, and such as, well, for example, they flooded with these kind of images the Blue Life Matter campaign by the police that try to attract attention to the fact that also police officers' lives were matter, and try to do some kind of critique of Black Lives Matter. So they did a counter critique, flooding with images of this. Also, if you know the blue group, these people that paint themselves as completely group, that was another image that was put. So you will looking for this hashtag, and instead of finding images of police doing their duties or whatever, you will find, the Smurfs. You will find this. So they're trying to pollute, in a way, insert noise into the narrative, so that, this is a form of disruption, in a way, but also infusing it with irony. We see that irony is a constant for this. There's also this ironic thing that brings it to try to also to I don't know, to infuse these irony that characterize part of the digital youth culture, especially on TikTok. But this is not by any way just merely related to hashtag. Police officers in the US, for example, have been playing copyrighted music with their phones multiple times during attempts to be recorded by activists during their encounters. Why? Because for a thing, the algorithmic is activated and wouldn't stream what the activist is trying to stream because of copyright law. So you see this example of suddenly an activist wanting to have accountability by a police officer, and police officers starting to boost Taylor Swift full with a speaker, like what is going on here? So, awareness of algorithm work and how to prevent visibility or accountability is just, as I was saying, widespread now, daily. It's just something that many different actors can use for different kind of aims, as we have seen, social change objectives, but at the same time trying to not be accountable and trying not to be on the public radar, trying to stifle a message, and so on and so forth. You always see both sides of the barricade. Takeaways at the end, and trying to sum up, in a way, to wrap up. So why beyond hashtag activism? The talk. So beyond hashtag activism, because hashtag activism is just a small part of this, Algorithmic activism includes, but exceeds it. We're talking about more than hashtags, and we're talking about when we're talking about hashtag, we're talking about hashtag in different platforms, but then we are looking at a broader variety of platforms, of devices, of actors, and social political domains. And I want to say also that we're talking about hybrid kind of politics, that this kind of activism is an activism, just like the police officer's example on the street just shows, it has to do with devices, it has to do with algorithms, but it also has to do with ourselves in the streets in a lot of different kind of situations. And it crosses the online and offline, but it goes well beyond hashtags. So we need to kind of avoid the platform-specific view to look at the whole ecology of manifestations. And that's the first point. The second point, which I think is really important, is what we have called the agnosticism of algorithmic activism. Some of these examples, they pointed to the fact that algorithms are being equally, and in fact, I would say that probably, the far right is appropriating them more skillfully in many ways. So they are appropriated equally by racist and xenophobic movement, oppressive regimes in the world, but at the same time by progressive activists and radical collectives. So it's a struggle, an ongoing one, but we don't have to assume something that somehow social movement studies were like leaning in a way, especially with the analysis of digital technology, towards the progressive side for a number of reasons, which we can discuss. But in the last years, we have been seeing exactly, the opposite. And so let's assume that algorithmic activism is navigated and pervaded by opposite forces. It's a continuum of different forces. And the third point, which has emerged from these different experiences, is that algorithmic politics in general is characterized by an incessant concatenation of struggles between algorithmic strategies and tactics, bottom up and top down. So these three mechanisms, amplification, evasion, and hijacking, can be used from above by institutional actors and are not the exclusive realm of citizen and activists. In fact, what we're witnessing today is the continuous struggle between, for example, and coming back to the encounter with Mexico, the continuous struggle that I already witnessed in 2012 was the way algorithms were hijacked, for example, by the government, and the manipulated and the noise was inserted in order to pollute the narrative and the amplification and the visibility. And at the same time, a new hashtag or a new narrative was created in reaction to that by social movement. That is the incessant struggle, the concatenation I'm talking about. So we have to look at multiple actors with different objectives, but we have also to look at these as a continuous concatenation of practices that work as a back and forth, where there is different agents operating. The platforms are trying to catch up and to with this circumvention mechanism. The actors are being on top of that and finding new ways to exercise their agency. But at the same time, these actors are different kind of actors with a different agenda, okay? So that's the complex scenario that we are looking at nowadays. And in the book, exactly what we look at is this scenario, not just in politics, but overall. And this is something that permeates our everyday life, a continuous engagement with algorithms that are here to stay, but it's up to us to see whether we want to use them for justice and equality, or we want to use them to perpetrate domination and forms of oppression. But these two dynamics are present and very much interacting, clashing with each other every day. And I think this is something that we need to take into account and try to find new ways of investigating this and looking at this at the intersection between power, agency, and resistance in the digital age. This is important, and it needs our scrutiny and our attention. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emiliano, for that really stimulating talk. It brought the paper that we edited back to me, so I read it in close detail many times as an editor, and it's a very exciting paper. And now we have the pleasure of being joined by Edmund Cheng. Edmund is an associate professor in the Department of Public and International Affairs at the City University of Hong Kong. He's an expert in contentious politics, in political communication, in methods, among other areas of expertise. And he has a regional focus on East and Southeast Asia. He is also a very valued editor at Social Movement Studies. And it's my great pleasure to work with him every week. So without further ado, Edmund is going to say some things from his perspective, responding to Emiliano's talk. So just come up here so that the people online can also, they can see him, right? Working. I don't know what the tech is, so why don't you handle it so that Edmund can. Okay, so right there, you can see. No, it's Emiliano. Okay, so where's
Sure, man. You want to be into sport? I'm omnipresent. I don't know what's going on.
So Emiliano, I guess have to get off this area so that Edmund will.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah, yeah.
I don't understand. We'll stand over here.
Okay, okay.
I'll be around.
Hello, everyone, and
Round.
okay, great. And thanks, Christina, for the kind invitation and introductions. It's really nice to see you all here, and it's really my pleasure to. I see myself as more a facilitator than a discussion, because I mean there's so much things, ideas, and also observation that presented by Emiliano and I think that also really speak to the theme of the keynote speech in a way. We see scholars now working on algorithm, contentious politics via this kind of interception among different fields. So people of, I consider myself as a political sociologist already. I have a dual identity, but then, I mean, these so many things that are developing and evolving concerning the subject of this conference are really something that like Emiliano's talk that I think really different fields of scholar can further expand their research agenda and learn something new. And that is really fascinating for me. I will just focus on a little bit on some of the themes that are being touched upon. That for me is really fascinating. I mean, for example, one will be, first of all, I will go back to the typologies that just discussed about as not as a stake, but also as a repertoire. I mean, something of course social movement scholars has always been interested in, right? In a way, how these kind of actions and reaction to the new algorithm change, but also reflect different sort of social life and actions. For me, of course, the keyword here, visibility, for me is really important. That is something. I mean, I like to talk that it is perhaps when we are giving this kind of talk in 2023, after so many struggle before in the 2020s, but also that in a way we go beyond the optimism in the post-war, post-Soviet era. That okay, this kind of algorithm, social media are going to either politically bring about liberal and democracy or able to fight social injustice. I mean, these kind of things has changed. I think we are in a way go beyond that era. And I like the point that the talk actually bring us to about this kind of mutual dynamics and how different platforms are actually enabling struggle, but also in a way probably actually deepen certain kind of social cleavage, political cleavage, polarization that we found they're expanding. Okay, and for me that would be also a reflection, but also a correction. I think whether or not particularly with, I mean, I come from Hong Kong and I study South and East Asia. We know this kind of context somehow also matters. These kind of social structures, because I mean, political powers are in a way very different and fragmented in different geographical areas, and in which I would just want to hear more a little bit about what happened, particularly when in the global South, especially Latin America. Okay, and when people use this kind of social media, how, to what extent they is somehow different when we see in a lot of literature focused on American politics or sometimes European, that because of their social institutions, their relatively freer media, I mean, there's some kind of check and balanced. But in others area in the global South, we see power still much concentrate in certain political elites, preaching crime politics, and they have, as the talk suggests, they tend to, in a way, deepen or reinforce because those elites have the power, okay, to play with the capital, play with the technology, and in a way making some of the key terms that given in the talk, resistance or the power of the bottom up, much more easy to be, whether or not to be manipulated, or whether or not the example, I think whether we can think of other example or based on the field work and also other things that Emiliano studies bring us to think about these kind of questions. Another thing is I think about platform affordance and also about different social media platforms enabling but also restricting us. For me, I mean, although I study political communication social media a lot, I mean, I myself, I do not often use social media now. I mean, because of course, it's due to a lot of socio-political change, but also due to, in a way, I believe I live in a fragmented life when I use different social media platform. I tend to be very professional when I'm using Twitter. When I tend to be more about expressing to my close friends or making some sort of public commentation on Facebook. Okay, and on IG, well, sometimes which you can't find me on IG because it's completely anonymous, different account. I mean, that's about social, really about social and everyday life. So those are things I think in a way when we talk about agency, when we talk about individual, that individual is also something really have a multiple identity and multiple version of their life, and in a way that also talk to the other things about their actions. So I mean, social media is a very interesting thing because some are more visible. In Facebook, you tend to use your view identity. I mean, if you register earlier and that is your main account and that sort of thing. But in other platform, you have a different identity, and also meaning that you are also using that particular platform for certain kind of political and social goal very differently. Okay, and I think that would be something interesting, but also point to another thing about generation, which I think had not been fully discussed in the talk. And I think that is important because when we talk about these different platforms, I mean, I cannot communicate with my students if I do not use IG. I mean, if you use Facebook, at least in Hong Kong's context or in Southeast Asia, you are a different generation. You are something alien. Okay, I mean, we don't use Facebook. All my students don't use Facebook anymore. But Facebook is a very different platform of audience. It still allows certain kind of discussion, I would say public discussion that in the public sphere that's still very much important. But then IG is very completely different. So how we can communicate with them, I think in the talk, they mentioned a lot of things about means, about symbols, and all these have not been widely studied. Okay, particularly with regard to IG's platform, in contrast to Trere's and others. So I still have some other, I just want to say, there are just so many things. I mean, particularly the algorithm farming. I mean, this is really something really fascinating, I think, at the very beginning. I mean, and this talk, and that is also the world that we are living in. So, but I mean, in a way, for me, it's always interested in how, I might have already touched upon this, it's about how in a way, power institutions, authority, how to really use that. Okay, and about, it's not simply about resistance, it's also about how they appropriate and these kind of forms of algorithm and the world that we are living in. So I mean, I should just say it's a fascinating talk and allow us to give a lot of reflections, and it's really a great kickoff to the 2 days event. So I look forward to the discussion. So yeah, thanks a lot.